David's water stopped flowing. No warning, no explanation. Das salt de Just a cold note blaming him for unpaid fees. In the scorching heat, his home became a desert, his dogs thirsty, his hope draining away. But cutting his water wasn't just a mistake. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. David stood on his cracked front porch, the late afternoon sun beating down mercilessly, his eyes fixed on the gaping hole where the water line once ran. The metal pipe lay twisted, severed cleanly by a heavy blade or wrench, a brutal, deliberate slice through the lifeblood of his home. His mind raced with disbelief and fury. How could the city be so reckless, so callous? His water wasn't just a municipal service. It was a symbol of dignity, something he had fought to protect abroad, and now found stripped away at home. The note on his door fluttered lightly in the dry breeze. The stark black letters a cold slap to his face. Water service suspended due to unpaid municipal fees. It was a lie. David's meticulous records proved every bill was paid on time, every receipt filed. The city council's excuse felt like a cheap attempt to mask something deeper, a political maneuver to tighten budgets by any means necessary, even if it meant victimizing the most vulnerable. To David, it wasn't about money. It was about power, about sending a message to veterans and others on the edge of poverty. You're expendable. Linda's presence at his side was a rare comfort. The elderly widow's eyes brimmed with sympathy and disbelief. "This is outrageous," she whispered. "You served this country, and they treat you like a criminal? How do they justify this?" Her words echoed what David felt but dared not voice aloud, a bitter, burning injustice that gnawed at his very soul. David's fingers clenched into fists. He thought back to the long months in desert heat, the sleepless nights in makeshift camps, the endless struggle to keep alive against hostile forces. Water had been scarce then, rationed with military precision. Here, in the heart of Cedar Falls, the very community that owed him gratitude had turned its back. The betrayal cut deeper than any enemy's bullet. The city council's decision wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move by a local government stretched thin, looking to trim expenses in the face of mounting budget crises. But in their zeal, they overlooked one critical fact. The main water supply line to David's home was part of a federally maintained system, overseen by Army engineers tasked with safeguarding the infrastructure, serving veterans and military families. The city had crossed a legal and moral line, severing a protected federal utility without authorization. David's mind shifted from shock to resolve. This wasn't just a fight for water, it was a battle for respect, for recognition of the sacrifices made by those who served. The city council's arrogance, their ignorance of the law, was an affront that demanded a response. Yet, beneath the anger, a quiet dread lingered. What would come next? Would the city retaliate further, escalate the cruelty? Could a lone veteran really stand against the combined weight of local bureaucracy and political indifference? As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement and dry garden beds, David felt a simmering fire ignite within him. The water was gone, but his spirit was far from broken. The next steps were unclear, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let this injustice go unanswered, not for himself and not for the countless others quietly suffering in the shadows of a system that had forgotten them. David's phone buzzed late one evening with a call he hadn't expected but desperately needed. On the other end was Captain Sarah Miller, an Army engineer stationed just outside Cedar Falls, known among veteran circles for her rigor and unyielding integrity. Her voice carried an edge of disbelief when he relayed the details. "David, this isn't just a screw-up. It's negligence, maybe worse," she said bluntly, her tone sharpened by professional outrage. For someone like her, with a younger brother who had returned from Iraq with invisible wounds, such betrayal was personal. Within hours, Sarah's team was on site, tracing the water lines with technical precision. The main supply pipeline, federally managed and protected, had been tampered with unlawfully. The city's decision to cut off David's water wasn't just an administrative blunder, it was a flagrant violation of federal jurisdiction and veterans' rights. Using emergency protocols, the engineers bypassed the severed city-controlled connection, tapping directly into the federal main line to restore water service. The rush of clean water back into David's taps felt like a small victory, a balm to the wounds of neglect. But the reprieve was short-lived. A formal invoice arrived weeks later at the city council office, a staggering six-figure bill for the emergency restoration. The Army engineers, though resolute in their duty to serve veterans, weren't inclined to absorb costs resulting from unauthorized interference. The message was clear. The city would bear the financial burden of its reckless action. Inside City Hall, panic rippled through the council chambers. The budget was already strained, squeezed tight by economic downturns and political gridlock. This sudden, massive expense landed like a thunderclap, igniting bitter infighting. Some council members sought scapegoats, pointing fingers at David for supposedly forcing their hand. The narrative shifted swiftly. David wasn't a victim, but a delinquent, responsible for unpaid fees that justified the city's harsh measures. David felt the walls closing in. His anger, once fierce and focused, began to twist into something deeper and more painful. A raw sense of betrayal by the very community he had served and sought to rebuild in. The legal threats from the city council, accusing him of mounting debts and threatening lawsuits, transformed the fight over water into a grueling battle over personal honor and survival. Yet, the community's response complicated the council's narrative. Linda, David's steadfast neighbor and advocate, mobilized quickly, her voice resonant with conviction. She reached out to local veterans, neighbors, and activists, weaving together a coalition bound by shared frustration and righteous indignation. The petition she spearheaded amassed signatures rapidly, a chorus growing louder with each passing day. Town hall meetings erupted into heated forums, where veterans and citizens confronted council members with unyielding demands for accountability and justice. The air in Cedar Falls crackled with tension. Every gathering felt electric, charged with a mixture of anger at systemic cruelty, simmering frustration over long-standing neglect, and cautious hope stirred by collective action. David watched as strangers became allies, as his personal ordeal illuminated fractures in a system that had long ignored its most vulnerable. The fight had grown beyond him. It was now a struggle for dignity, recognition, and the principle that those who serve should never be abandoned or punished for the courage to stand up. Through sleepless nights and mounting pressure, David's resolve hardened. This wasn't merely about restoring water. It was about reclaiming a sense of justice that bureaucracy had so callously denied. The stakes were no longer abstract. This was about a community's soul and the measure of its humanity. The sun hung low over Cedar Falls, casting a golden hue across the modest neighborhood where David Harris stood quietly, his gaze fixed on the gleaming new water line stretching beneath freshly laid asphalt. The air was thick with a charged stillness, punctuated only by murmurs of anticipation from the gathered crowd. Veterans, neighbors, city officials, and reporters pressed close, the buzz of cameras and whispered conversations weaving a tapestry of hard-won justice. This moment was more than ceremonial. It was a profound reckoning. Weeks of relentless pressure had brought the city council to its knees. The cold bureaucrats who had once dismissed David's plight with callous indifference now found themselves cornered by mounting public outrage and searing media scrutiny. A veteran rights lawyer, armed with meticulously gathered evidence and a fierce commitment to truth, had taken up David's cause, dismantling the council's flimsy defenses one legal brief at a time. The city's capitulation was no mere formality. It was a public admission of error and a rare, grudging acknowledgement of the deep wounds their actions had inflicted. The official apology, issued in a hastily convened press conference, carried a weight that transcended words. The rescinded six-figure bill was symbolically important, but insufficient on its own. More significant was the council's pledge to overhaul water policies affecting veterans and low-income residents, a promise to listen, to change, to repair a broken system. The air of defeat that had permeated the council chambers was palpable. The political calculus had shifted irreversibly under the glare of the public spotlight. Amid the turning tide, Captain Sarah Miller emerged not just as an engineer, but as an architect of hope. Her proposal for a federally funded infrastructure program, an initiative to guarantee reliable water access for veterans throughout Cedar Falls, was a bold vision born from the harsh lessons of David's ordeal. The city's reluctant acceptance of the plan was a testament to the power of unified voices and the unavoidable weight of accountability. This wasn't charity. It was justice materializing in pipes and valves, ensuring no veteran would endure the same indignity again. As David's hands grasped the ceremonial scissors, his breath caught, not from anxiety, but from the surge of meaning coursing through him. This ribbon did not just separate past neglect from future security. It symbolized vindication, the reclamation of dignity after months of pain and struggle. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the faces before him, a crowd transformed from witnesses to believers. They saw in David's journey a reflection of their own battles, their own hopes deferred and dreams threatened by indifferent systems. The crowd's cheers erupted like a tide, a swelling chorus that carried far beyond the street corner. For many, David's fight crystallized the abstract ideals of resilience and justice into tangible form. Here was a man battered by injustice, yet unbowed, his courage a beacon, illuminating the path from despair to empowerment. His story rippled outward, inspiring not just veterans, but every citizen who had ever faced the cold machinery of bureaucracy and dared to demand fairness. In that charged air, the drought of injustice was broken. Where water had been cruelly withheld, a flood of hope now surged, transforming private pain into collective strength. David's victory was a testament, even in the harshest droughts of life, where despair threatens to choke the spirit dry, determination and courage can carve a channel for justice to flow free. His triumph became more than a single man's story. It was the pulse of a community renewed, a clarion call that no one who serves will ever be abandoned or forgotten.